Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This is a Little Blue Book. It happens to be Little Blue Book number 1419, and it is entitled Curious and Unusual Deaths, written by Russell R. Winterbotham. It's a short book, so who knows, we may be able to get through this in 1-2 readings. No copyright date. And we'll start with the first page. Curious and Unusual Deaths Introduction. To Mark Twain is attributed the unusual discovery that more persons die in bed than from riding on trains. However, one is interested in deaths from train wrecks, for that is an unusual way to have one's life end. Our interest is centered about curious things. The more unusual it is, the longer it is remembered. The following pages contain a discussion of about 75 detailed cases and brief mention of nearly 170 other deaths and several close shaves. There are many celebrated examples that have been purposely omitted because they are probably already known to the reader, or they are mentioned in other Little Blue books. An example is Jack the Ripper and his victims, discussed in Historic Crimes and Criminals. These are the stories one reads with interest in the daily newspapers. In several cases, they are the inside story that was not printed in the papers. The author of this Little Blue Book personally investigated some of the deaths as a newspaper reporter. Others were given publicity in various newspapers and periodicals. A few curious incidents. One need not fear death from most of the causes mentioned under this head. They form but a microscopic minority of fatalities. Most of us, being orderly, will die in an orderly way. It looked like murder. Early one morning, near a suburb of Chicago, a youth was found in a field fatally wounded. He had been shot through the head by a .22 caliber rifle lying several feet from his body. He died without regaining consciousness, and nothing was found about the body by which to identify him. The wounded man lay near a fence, and the soft plowed ground torn up about him led the authorities to suspect that there had been a struggle and that the young man might have been slain or accidentally killed in a scuffle over the gun. A companion was sought. Upon re-examining the young man's clothing, a telephone number was found written on his hat band. Although it was nearly obliterated by bloodstains, the number, a Chicago exchange, was called, and it was found to be the home of a boy who had been missing overnight. The mother identified the body as that of her son. She said that he had left home early the morning before to go job hunting, but the gun was not his. The mother said her son had never owned a rifle. When the newspaper published the story, the owner of the gun, a friend of the dead youth, appeared before the police and explained that the gun had been borrowed by the young man who had decided to go rabbit hunting the afternoon before his death. The death was then explained as an accidental discharge of the gun as a youth was dragging or pulling it through the fence. He had lain unconscious on the ground overnight. The torn up ground was caused, it was thought, by the thrashing about of the wounded man. The unidentified man. Early one summer in a Kansas town, the body of a man was found floating on the river. He was identified as a man who had applied at the Government Employment Bureau for work a few days before. The father of this man was notified. When the father arrived, he was surprised to find his son, whom he believed to be dead, loafing about the railroad station. Upon hearing the story, the son decided that it might have been a second son who was found. A telegram to the second son's last address brought a response, however, and the authorities were forced to take another look at the body. The corpse was badly decomposed, but still the authorities thought they recognized it as that of another man known to the police. He was buried in Potter's Field. 2 months later, the dead man was picked up by the police for vagrancy. Now the authorities do not know whom they buried. The clock that never ran down. An interesting coincidence, which has never been printed, happened in a western town. A prominent citizen owned a clock, which was highly prized by him as an antique. For years he took care of the clock, winding it himself and allowing no other hands to touch it. To the knowledge of his family, the clock had not stopped in many years. In his declining years he took sick, and as he lay on his deathbed, the clock ran down. Of his wife, children, and all of his relatives assembled, no one knew how to wind the clock. Finally, a local jeweler was summoned who mastered the intricate mechanism of the old timepiece and started the clock going again. Soon after, the clock was wound, and the first time by hands other than its owners since it came into the family. The sick man died. Swimming with a corpse. A rather gruesome episode happened in another town at a municipal swimming pool. A young man and a friend were swimming one hot summer afternoon, when they heard a little girl say, "A boy dived in and didn't come up." A score of persons were swimming at the time, and one might easily have lost track of a boy in the continually diving and splashing crowd in the small pool. But the girl insisted, and about an hour after her first remark the words were carried to the manager of the pool. The young man and his friend were in the dressing room, but the manager approached them and asked if they would again don their bathing suits and search the pool for the body. He had no lifeguard on duty. "There's a white saddle horse outside," the manager said, "and it might belong to someone who is in there dead." The young man plunged into the pool, thinking that it was all nonsense. To his surprise, he swam directly into the cold body. Perhaps 30 or more people had been in and out of the pool during the time since the little girl's first remark, and not one of them had knowingly touched the drowned boy, nor knew they were swimming with a dead person. 6 inches from saving a life. In the spring one year, when waters were high, a young man and 2 companions were canoeing. While they were in the middle of the river, the canoe suddenly upset. One of the young men, an expert swimmer, followed behind his 2 companions as they struck out for shore. When he arrived within a few yards of the shore, he turned about and struck out after the canoe to save it, his friends thought. The swift current had carried the boat down the river, and when the young man reached the center of the stream, his companions observed that he was evidently in distress. They secured a rope from a nearby house and rushed to a long bridge which crossed the river several hundred yards below where their companion was struggling. This they dropped down from the bridge. The young man was nearly exhausted by the time the current carried him to the bridge, and he extended his hands to grasp the rope, but it was 6 inches too short, and the youth sank to his death. Murders his chum. 2 friends at a southern university were... Start that again. Murders his chum. 2 youths at a southern university were close friends. One of them was in financial difficulties, and he determined to turn bandit in order to secure enough money to continue school. He purchased a gun and waited on a dark street for a victim to approach. A man came along. "Stick 'em up," commanded the youth. A struggle followed. 2 shots were fired. When the robber was captured, he learned that he had slain his chum. Feuds. Feuds are not uncommon, even in this day and age. A quarrel which had lasted for generations between the Lovato and Medina families at Dixon, New Mexico, flared up when the two families met at a country wedding dance. In a gun battle, 3 of the Medina brothers were fatally wounded. Their victors, 3 Lovato brothers, were held on a murder charge. In Crossett, Arkansas, 2 well-known and highly respected citizens settled their differences in the good old Southern way by shooting it out at close range. The duel occurred in the heart of the city. Both men were killed and a bystander wounded in the neck. One man was said to have been paying too much attention to the wife of the other. Miscellaneous deaths and escapes. In a southern town, a youth became exhausted while swimming in a large pool. He sank to the bottom, where he gave himself a punch to the surface with his feet. When he reached the top, he would shout help, and take a deep breath and repeat the process. After doing this several times, he attracted the attention of the lifeguard who rescued him. His presence of mind saved his life. A woman, 78 years old, wandered into a river one night and died of the shock. It was believed that she fell asleep while sitting on her front porch and was sleepwalking. She was found by a search party. At the Indianapolis Speedway, a man was once fatally injured in a race without knowing that he was seriously hurt. The timing wire, which automatically registered the cars as they sped over it, was broken by a car as it sped by the judge's stand. The loose end flew up and slashed the neck of the driver of another car closely following the first. The intense excitement of the race caused the driver not to notice his injury until he was nearly exhausted from loss of blood. He died before aid could be administered. A curious will was left by a woman of Los Angeles, California, bequeathing all her possessions to her dog. The strange document, containing many misspelled words, ran as follows: Los Angeles, California, November 1st, 1925. In case of my death, I leave all I possess, of origin both real and personal, to my dog, Dick, a Lilium setter, black and white. I name Miss Emma Foster, of 60, and Monte Vista, as guardian and caretaker of my dog, Dick. Cats and chickens to be humanely disposed of. In Dubuque, Iowa, a man, 101 years old, died jumping after a toy balloon. He gave the balloon to his grandson as a Christmas gift. One afternoon, the boy let it get away from him, and the aged gentleman died from overexertion as he jumped after it. Some martyrs. There has been a good deal of controversy as to the justification of dying for a cause. Robert Ingersoll once said that in preference to burning at the stake, he would admit belief in any god. It is true that many lives have been sacrificed in the furthering of useless and trivial causes. For every martyr who has really contributed to the welfare of mankind, there have been many who have given their lives for false ideals and in vain. Martyrs in Science. Here listed are the names of men whose contributions to the human race are priceless and who died in learning the secrets of nature. They are the self-sacrificing research workers of medical science. The most important martyrs on the records of the New York Academy of Medicine and in the Bureau of Medical Information will be given. It has been at a great cost that science has enabled mankind to battle the parasites that cause fevers and plagues. Knowing that death was approaching, many of these heroes continued their work until they were overcome. In 1900, Jesse W. Lazier, a member of the United States Army Yellow Fever Commission, volunteered to allow himself to be bitten by a mosquito to test the transmission of the disease. Dr. Lazier told of his symptoms on his deathbed. James Carroll also subjected himself to the bite of the yellow fever mosquitoes in 1900 in Cuba. He died 7 years later from lesions of the heart which were believed to have been induced from the disease. In 1928, Hideo Negaguchi of Japan, a member of the Rockefeller Foundation, died a martyr to his experimenting with yellow fever in Africa. He discovered the parasite of yellow fever and later contracted the disease. Dr. Howard Taylor Ricketts of Chicago and Philadelphia died in Mexico from an attack of typhus fever in 1910. He was studying the disease, and while in Mexico he proved that tabardillo, a Mexican fever, was a manifestation of typhus fever and that it was transmitted by the body louse. In 1927, Dr. Adrian Stokes of Ireland died in West Africa from the yellow fever while attached to the Rockefeller Foundation and while studying the disease. Two other fever victims were Thomas B. McClintock, who died in Washington, D.C. of Rocky Mountain fever, a disease which he had been studying in 1915, and Dr. Tito Carbone of Italy, who died in 1904 of Maltese fever, the germ of which he had been studying. Dr. William S. Halsted, an American surgeon, died from undermined health, the result of making tests on himself by injecting cocaine to demonstrate the principle of nerve blocking. He became addicted to the drug and ruined his health in breaking himself of the habit. Halsted was the creator of the modern method of local anesthesia. He died in 1922. The most recent victim of his own experimenting was Dr. Joseph Goldberger, who died in January of 1929 of an unknown affliction. He had suffered from typhus fever, yellow fever, and dengue fever at various times while experimenting with these diseases. He was studying the dietary cause of pellagra when he died. Roentgen or X-ray and radium experimenters have paid heavy toll with their lives for their research. In 1910, Myron Krykar Casablan of Philadelphia died from constant exposure to Roentgen rays. Walter James Dodd of Boston, a pioneer of roentgenologist, died in 1916 of burns. The inventor of the Caldwell liquid interpreter and other X-ray appliances, Dr. Eugene Wilson Caldwell of Savannah, Missouri, died in 1918 from repeated burns. M. Demetrius, former aide of Professor and MME Curie, died in 1925 of the tortures of a disease contracted through radium experiments. One of the most plucky X-ray surgeons who ever lived was Professor J. Burgon of France, who died in 1925 of burns received in his Roentgen ray experiments. Although the professor had both his right arm and left hand amputated at different times because of burns, he continued his experiments until he died. Burgon invented the magnet, which was used to extract bullets and shell fragments from wounded soldiers during the World War. He also was the inventor of an electronic vibrator, which was used with some success in treating shell-shocked veterans. And I believe we'll stop there for the day.